Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Do you have something you'd like some help with? Ask our guests. Go to professorgame.com/question and get your question answered in a future episode. And today we have somebody amazing, engagers. Today we have somebody that has been called before the Grandfather of Gamification. We'll go quickly into that, but before we do that, Chuck Coonradt, are you prepared to engage?
I am prepared to engage.
Let's do this. So Chuck Coonradt is the founder and CEO of The Game of Work, which was founded in 1973 and was recently Forbes Magazine called Chuck the Grandfather of Gamification, as I just said before. He has over 1 million executives, managers, and supervisors on 5 continents that have been exposed to his ideas on feedback, scorekeeping, goal setting, coaching, personal choice, and accountability. He has 5 best-selling books that are The Game of Work, The Better People Leader, Scorekeeping For Success, Managing the Obvious, and The 4 Laws of Financial Prosperity that have been labeled Management Must Read and are found around the world in many countries and languages. His client list includes many Fortune 500 companies as well as other national and internationally recognized firms. Just as a few examples, we have Pepsi, U.S. Postal Service, General Foods, Leslie's Poolmart, Nordstrom, the U.S. Air Force, Boeing, etc., etc. So Chuck, is there anything that we left out of this intro that you would like to highlight?
Father of 4 and proud grandfather of 8.
Beautiful. That's fundamental and fantastic as well. So Chuck, let's get right into the first question. And we always like to get a bit slightly personal with our guests to understand how their life works, how their ideas get into flow and all those things. So the first question that we would like to know from you is, what does a regular day with Chuck look like?
Well, a regular day with Chuck is usually a lot of fun. I've retired, and so my day in the wintertime is spent with a half a day of skiing and usually some workout in addition to that to stay in shape and try to keep the old bod from eroding too fast. But the part that our audience may be interested in is that the rest of that day is typically spent either in face-to-face one-on-one coaching at the executive level, at the C-suite, with a very limited number of clients, or it's spent in a telephone engagement around the same process. So at this stage of the game, what I am primarily doing is reaching out to people who have installed the process called the Game of Work, and fine-tuning and tweaking a little bit with that.
That's fantastic. And that's something, as you can hear, engagers, guests like Chuck, whose time is extremely valuable, and we're very thankful for having him on this show, is a massive opportunity to learn from somebody with all this experience, all this massive knowledge, and built from all of these things that Chuck has been able to do. And Chuck, how did you get that title of the Grandfather of Gamification?
Well, as many of the listeners may know, gamification is a term, and if you go to Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge, they will credit it to a combination of Berkeley math majors, and some work that was being done by some of the big players in the Silicon Valley. The Fortune contributor, a gentleman by the name of Ken Krogh, was aware of our work, and he had been asked by his editor to do a piece on gamification, application, where does it work, where does it not work. And Ken was aware of our book, was a reader and a fan. So he wrote this little piece that's available on Forbes if anybody wants to check it out, fundamentally saying that although these whiz kids in 2004 thought they had just stumbled onto the Holy Grail, that there was a predecessor piece almost exactly 20 years ahead of that that reflected some of the more solid principles that are in gamification. And Ken actually hung that title on me, which has made it a little harder for me to retire because people continue to want to know what a grandfather could know.
There's all those fantastic stories, and all that knowledge comes from our grandparents, for sure. And Chuck, precisely in that same sense, we would like to hear a story, because I'm sure that you've had a lot of success, as we already know, but not always has it been like complete success and all the rainbows and unicorns. I'm sure there's been tougher times, and we would like to know of a time or a situation that you could call your favorite failure or your favorite fail, first attempt in learning. You know what I mean? And maybe it even set you for learning or for future success. That's the kind of story that we're looking for.
We had an opportunity to do a project in an industry that we had a great deal of success in. In this industry, and I sort of have to mask it a little bit, forgive me, Rob, but the industry is sort of one of those that are filled with privately held, family-owned, second and third generation businesses that have grown from grandpa up. And so part of the process of gamification is an open, frequent sharing of appropriate feedback for appropriate behavior. If you go all the way back to B.F. Skinner, the first thing that he taught us in behavioralism is you need to reinforce the behavior you want repeated. And although academicians and other students will sit there and nod their head like a little bobble doll, in fact, what we typically measure are the errors, the mistakes, the accidents, the misses, the glitches, because there's fewer of them and it's easier. But emotionally, it's terrible. So we were implementing the process, and we were kind of stalled. We weren't getting the traction that we normally get. And so I pulled the CEO aside, who's actually third generation from the founder, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, part of what you asked us to do with these people is to share with them the critical scorecards in our business." I said, "Yeah, because you hired them to achieve success in those scorecards." "Well, Chuck, we know that, but we just don't feel comfortable exposing some of those ratios to the people in our business." Now, I should, on a disclaimer basis, I was not talking about net operating income or profitability or anything else. But this family was so internally focused that they were unwilling to share the necessary results and feedback that the Game of Work was asking their people to produce. And we actually wrote those people a refund check and terminated the agreement. And that, what it taught us to do, Rob, was to get an upfront agreement between our facilitator and the CEO or leader of the group that we were working with, that we would have full disclosure, that these people would treat their employees like the partners that they need to be in a successful organization, and would not try to treat them like mushrooms, grow them in the dark, bury them in fertilizer, and only bring them out when you want to pluck them. So that was probably one of the failures. And we turned it around. I don't know it was our failure, but it was our failure because we didn't look at it. I'd like to tell you another story about where I thought I was absolutely right and turned out to be wrong as rain, but it turned out to be a great success. We were doing a supermarket company headquartered in Boston, and we always try to set up a scorecard, and the scorecard's based on results to resources ratios. Now, that's just a thought technology, but in its simplest form, it's a batting average in baseball. It's a field goal percentage in basketball.
Yeah, it's basically keeping a score for what the people do with some sort of algorithm or a simple formula or complex formula could be for whatever it is you're trying to measure, right?
Right. So we want to go back in, and because ownership is so critical, and one of the failures in too many, quote, gamification approaches is they don't allow the players choice, and so they don't get buy-in. All right. So I'm back in Boston, and these good-hearted folks said, Chuck, you know what we need to do is that and I don't want to confuse the audience, but what we need to do is we need to measure shrink. Now, in the supermarket, shrink is a polite word for employee theft, customer theft, rotten bananas, old bakery bread, and green meat. Okay. And in the supermarket business, that number is at least as big as their net profit. So it's another word is it's money we don't know where it went. And it's almost equal to the net profit, which makes it very critical. So this group came in and they said, we're going to track shrink per labor hour. For every labor hour that works in the market, we're going to track the amount of shrink we're going to calculate it. And I'm sitting I'm sitting there at the head of the table, the professor, the pundit, and I'm thinking to myself, this is the dumbest scorecard I can imagine. It's very subjective. There's not going to be a finalization to it. It's going to be not tied to the P&L. But one of the things that we recognize is the most important thing in scorecards and in games is that they're credible to the people who play them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so credibility is even more important than accuracy. So I bite my tongue, and they go ahead with the process, and I'm back 2 weeks later, and they're holding up these scorecards and they're saying, see, we got it down. And there actually is a fairly reasonable way to track it. You look for broken packages that indicate shoplifting. You know what your stales are in the bakery department, your throwaway in produce and meat. So you can get your arms around the number. It's not quite as vague as I said, but really, really squishy. And I'm going, oh my gosh, we're in trouble now because this is looking good. So I keep my mouth shut, which doesn't happen very often, but this was one of the great times. And they go another 2 weeks. Well, now we're getting to the end of the month, and I'm thinking, the accounting reports are going to come out in a couple of weeks, and they're going to just blow this thing to get apart because it's not going to translate into net operating income or an improvement in gross margin. So I keep my mouth shut. The 2 weeks go by. The accounting reports come out, and lo and behold, there's an improvement in gross margin, which means that we're actually getting less shrink. And everybody's going, wow, see, we found it. We found the Holy Grail. So again, I keep my mouth shut, but I got to tell you, I'm just waiting for the curtain to be exposed, and we're going to be just naked in front of the whole corporation. So they do it again, another 2 weeks. The next month's statement comes out, the gross margin improves again. And this goes on for about 90 days. And they got to a point of success, and then they actually maintained it. So I'm supposed to know all this stuff, So I'm sitting back thinking, what did I just see? And what I recognized was that because they had this daily, frequent feedback tool that raised their awareness, they were changing their behavior to affect those things that they wanted to have happen.
They knew what the managers were expecting of them. That's powerful feedback.
Yeah, but they owned it. They absolutely owned it. And because they owned it, even though it may not have been empirically accurate, and it may not be the same finiteness, if you'll allow me that word, that you would get where you have an NBA player and somebody else is tracking their score. I mean, we know exactly what LeBron James's free throw percentage is. We know what those kinds. So it didn't have that empirical correctness, but it did the job because it gave feedback on the behavior we want repeated. And it was just, wow.
That sounds fantastic. And actually, there's a few things I'd like to highlight from your story, Chuck, from your two stories actually, because one of them, and this most recent one is about the feedback. We always talk about the feedback, and this is just another opportunity to see what feedback is able to do for your players. If you give them sufficient feedback, if you give them frequent feedback, they are able to understand what the game is structured for. And it doesn't mean that some things, as Chuck was saying, are going to be perfect and the measurement is going to be perfect. Just like in high school, just like in the university when you have grades, which grades are for sure, they're just a proxy of how well the students are doing. But for now, it's as much as we get. But the better that we can get them and the more frequent feedback that we can give them, the more they know at least what you're expecting, and they're able to adjust their behavior towards that. If you feel that you want to adjust the behaviors of your players, you have to take a look at what kind of feedback you're giving them so that they can adjust their behavior towards the measurements that you're expecting from them. So I think that's something critical that I got from your story, Chuck.
And let me introduce one other adjective to feedback, and that is that the feedback needs to be appropriate.
What do you mean by appropriate?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because I set it up for you to ask me to explain that. I'm very happy we're doing this. Well, appropriate feedback means that feedback is appropriate to the performance. So if I go out and I'm in a sales organization and I go out and I get the largest contract at the best gross margin that my company has ever seen, appropriate feedback is not, that's what we pay you for. Appropriate feedback is not, that's your job. Appropriate feedback is a big brass band, a big bell, a big bass drum, and lots of accolades and cupcakes and whatever, because I just knocked the cover off the ball. I just brought a title to Cleveland, Ohio. That's legendary. Now, the other thing about appropriate is that when the performance is not celebratory, then appropriate feedback is corrective, but it's also instructional. So when you have a player who's not executing on what you need done, you have to first accept the responsibility that you as a coach are primarily responsible for their lack of performance. Now, that's a huge paradigm, I guess Dr. Stephen Covey would call it. But if you start with that as the coach, I'm responsible for the people I have, I'm responsible for their performance, I'm responsible because I decided to keep them, I'm responsible because I hired them or not. Let me throw a book out to you that I just finished reading. It's called Extreme Ownership. And the author is a guy by the name of Jocko Willis.
Yes.
He's a United States Navy SEAL. And he combines some battlefield experience from the Middle East with these principles that he's designed. But what his primary principle is that as a coach, owner, leader, teacher, whatever you may be in a position of power, you must own the outcomes, and you must own everybody's performance along the way. And it's a little cold water in the face when you first get at it, but as you look at it, that's what we really need to do. When I was at Michigan State, we had an amazing football program, and our coach was a little Irishman by the name of Duffy Doherty, who was always cute with a quip and funny. But Duffy said this probably in 1964, and he said it to the press one time, and we won almost every game. He said to the press, he said, "I don't understand. When we win, you all call it a team victory. And if we lose, you think it's my fault." Well, what Duffy was saying 60 years ago and what Willis is saying today is really an important confluence of that concept of servant leadership, that I need to own the results. And so gamification has to be about my helping my people become better people. And that's why we wrote the book on the better people leader. The better people leader is somebody who takes the raw material he or she has been given and enhances it, refines it, culls it, coaches it, and brings it to a higher level.
Absolutely. And I there's actually I can put it in the show notes. There's an interview of Jocko Willis with Tim Ferriss, I believe. It's a pretty interesting. It's very long. His podcast is super long, but it's very interesting, and it's precisely. Well, he goes around the topic of extreme ownership as well. But it's a fantastic interview. He's an impressive human being, to say the least. Chuck, there's something else that we would like to get into. As all the success that we've been talking about, we would like to know if there's some story that you're maybe especially proud of, or that you feel will resonate with the engagers, with his audience, about success, about saying, well, we went into this project, we did these things, and these were some results that we are very proud of. And how did that happen in that case?
Let me give you one that I didn't have much to do with. How's that? We have a gentleman who is not just a disciple of the game of work, but he's really an apostle in that he teaches it, lives it, loves it, breathes it. He has a son who graduated from the Air Force Academy 2 years ago. The story I'm about to tell you is 15 years prior to that. The young man is going to kindergarten or first grade, and he is a very bright child as his life plays out. But bright children are not necessarily encouraged in early education. In fact, you go see Dick and Jane run, and the kid goes, "No, I've been reading since I was 3." So the young man actually became a behavioral problem. So the teacher does what every good teacher does. She calls the parents in and blame them, and says, we're going to have to discipline him. We're going to have to put him in a special place because he's just disruptive. And so Ron, our client, says to the teacher, "Give me the 5 things that you need him to do in class." Well, I need him to pay attention, not interrupt other students, be respectful of the teacher. Honestly, Rob, I don't remember what they were. But she said, "These are 5 behaviors." Ron said, "Okay, thank you very much." And so they went home and they put together, as parents, they added another 5 behaviors for Chase to practice. 5 at school, 5 at home. Don't fight with your sister, etc. So then they put up a scoreboard. And every day, Chase got to tell what behaviors he accomplished. And if he got 8 out of 10, something like that, if he got 8 out of 10, he got a toy, not a big toy, just a little thing, okay? It's the kind of thing you'd get in an arcade for playing skee ball. But he'd get something that he wanted. And along with this, because we want to teach kids goal setting, Chase put together a list of the things that he wanted for his good behavior. Classic. So this goes, and then the other deal is that if out of the 50 opportunities a week, if he achieved, again, I don't remember, I think it was 40. If he got 40 of those behaviors during the week, he got 2 hours with his dad in the park. Now, his father, high-powered executive, move and shake and drive, and one of the best leaders and managers I've ever seen. 2 hours with Chase on a Friday afternoon. 7 days go by, 7 school days go by. The teacher calls up. She said, "You need to come in. I need to talk to you." So they get in. They say, she says, "Are you spanking him?" No, we're not. We're not spanking him. Are you paying him? So the teacher is totally befuddled because literally from Friday to Monday, Chase turns around, does all 5 things he's doing in the classroom. And he does this for 7 days, and she can't believe it. Ron said, "No." He said, "Would you like to know how we did it?" She goes, "Yeah, I'd love to." So Ron brings in the scorecard, talks about the little token toys, talks about the 2 hours a week on Friday or Saturday that Chase gets one-on-one focus time with us. And the teacher says, "Not possible. What did you really do?" Ron said, "This is what we did." Now think about the principle. First, you got clear goals, right? And so instead of saying, "Chase, stop that, don't do that, don't go here, don't go there," and doing the admonishment of the negative, we now had clear direction to a 5-year-old about what the teacher expected in class. Now think back to when you were in kindergarten or first grade. Not so much. Okay. Then we had appropriate feedback. So if Chase had a good day at school and got 5 out of 5, we're going. Now, the shame of this is that the teacher wasn't willing to be engaged. The teacher wasn't willing to look at the 5 behaviors, the 5 practices, and at the end of the day say to Chase, great job. But the parents were.
That was good enough, for sure.
Yeah. So that's probably my favorite success story.
That's a beautiful success story.
We've literally driven millions of dollars in bottom line performance. And through, as you read the client list, through everything from the United States Post Office to the United States Air Force to Pepsi to Nordstrom's these are clients that don't need help. One of the great things has been for us to get involved. Now, I guess it's back to you, Rob, for a question, but
that's fantastic because I couldn't have summed it up any better. So I'll just leave it as it was with all the things that you enumerated that were done and that were done well in that example. There's the only thing I would point out as a risk when doing these kinds of things. It's something that is spoken about a lot. Is that over justification effect of you do this because you're going to get a toy and those kind of things. But I mean, I'm sure that there's many ways around it. And of course, he got the results that were needed. And I'm sure it was not just for 7 days. It was for quite a long time. And the kid got used to the behavior and all these things that is exactly what we want. So I think it's a fantastic story.
Yeah. The other part of it is here's one of the great learnings in my life. I have been amazed at what you can get somebody who earns $100,000 a year, $2,000 a week, every week, electronically deposited. They never see the money. I am amazed what you can get that same individual to do for a $100 bill. It's just incredible. But, as kids, if we wanted money, usually we went out, we mowed lawns, we weeded onions, we hoed something, we did, and you worked. And at the end of the day, Farmer Johnson gave you $3 or whatever the number was, depending on how old you are, and I'm old. And you took the $3 and you went and bought the toy, or you got a soda, or you went out with your friends, or you went to the movie. Okay? Really, really simple motivational application. Work, reward, work, reward. But now, none of us see our paycheck. We get a stub. And unfortunately, sometimes we forget who signs it. And so we don't have that same, here, Chuck, here's your $3. Come back next Saturday. Love what you're doing. So we've muddied all of that. But what I'd like to do, Robin, I know we've got some time limit, and maybe we'll do some more later, but would you allow me to tell you the epiphany of the game of work and how we sort of stumbled on this?
Yeah, please do. In fact, I was given, as you were saying, the time that we have, just not to make it too long, I would actually be keen on inviting you to a second interview to make to go deeper into some of the subjects. But please go ahead.
Happy to do that. I think this is important because it indicates what's really different from the principles that we've been using for over 40 years. And what some of the new whiz-bang words are that have come out. So if I may, I was calling on what we in the United States, in the southeastern part of the United States, would refer to as a redneck. This guy was mid-50s, mid-career, not happy about either. And I was selling, this was as the Game of Work was being founded, but we had taken a franchise, and we were selling motivational management tool in a box. And this box was about the size of 2 3-ring binders and a cassette folder. So anyway, I'm calling on the guy, and this is really early in my career, probably 2 years in. I'm talking a little bit about what are you trying to do and where you're going. He goes, let me tell you what the problem is. The problem is kids today. Kids can't work. Kids don't care. Kids don't have the same value system I had when I was growing up, and I'm just dang tired of it. So I know that everybody in the audience has heard the Kids Today lecture because it's been going on every generation since the beginning of time. What I want to challenge us all to do is to try to remember the first day you gave it. because you just became your parents. It was a terrible transition. So he's given me kids today. Kids can't work. Kids don't care. And he takes me over to his window. Now, we're on the second story. We're looking down on the factory floor. In the factory, they're building houses. Now, you can call this modular housing or prefab or whatever, but they're building houses. And he said, what are you and your magic box going to do about that? And points down on the floor to 8 20-somethings who are framing this house. And to describe their work pace, you would need words like arthritic snails and wet cement. I mean, they look like mimes. It was pick up a nail, find a hammer, find a board. It was just pathetic. He goes, what are you and your box going to do about that? Now, those of us who are in the sales game know that when you get an objection, if you don't have a response for it, the clock stops. I mean, time stands still. And that's where I was. And then I got rescued by a lunch bell. Because the lunch bell rang, I watched those 8 guys drop their hammers like they were electrified. They took off on a dead run like somebody hit them with a cattle prod. 4 of them taking off their shirts, 50 yards down the factory floor to where they found a basketball hoop. And they went shirts and skins, 4-on-4, half-court basketball for 42 minutes. Sweating, motivated, enthused, tongues hanging out. No strat plan, no official review, no scorekeeping other than what they were doing themselves.
And no pay for sure.
And no pay, right? Nobody's paying them. They're on their own, they're on the clock. They're supposed to be eating lunch. So they go to 12:42 because I'm mesmerized. I realize that I'm seeing something that could very well define the rest of my life, and as it turned out, it did. And at 12:42, they stop. There's no whistle, no ref. They just stop, pick up their lunches, their sack lunches and their Cokes, and they start walking back to the workplace, eating their lunch while they walk. 1 o'clock, they're back on the clock, arthritic snails, wet cement. And it was the most amazing, sort of motivational transformation that I'd ever seen in my life. And I looked at the redneck and I said, you know what? It is not a raw material problem. There's nothing wrong with those kids. Their inherent motivation is deep and strong. And so we coined this tongue twister, and that is, why do people pay for the privilege of working harder on under the basketball hoop than they work when they're paid? And we started looking at what did we really see? What was the dichotomy? What was the dichotomy between these two circumstances? Okay. Well, under the basketball hoop, and then we identified, I wouldn't call this research, it would be an affront to that word, but as we thought about it, we crystallized our thinking on 5 key principles that we called the motivation of recreation. That was the answer to why people will pay for the privilege. And the number one that I didn't understand when I wrote the book, but the most important element is feedback. The feedback in recreation is more frequent than it is at work. So if we go on a tennis court and play 3 sets of tennis, we're going to hit that ball almost 600 times between the two of us. And every time we hit it, we're going to get some feedback. We go play a round of golf, and we're going to get feedback 70, 80, 90, 120 times in 4 hours every time. I happen to really enjoy shooting clay pigeons and skeet or the new game of sporting clays. And every time I pull that trigger, I get feedback on my performance. So we said this feedback thing is inherent to recreational enjoyment. And if you take somebody's scorecard away from them, they'll kill you. I mean, that's wrong. So the second thing we realized is that scorecards or scorekeeping was what drove the frequency of feedback. So the second principle in the motivation recreation is that the scorekeeping is dynamic and it's contemporaneous, and meaning that the players all know the score while the game's in progress, so they can change their behavior to win before time runs out. Now, I know that's kind of wordy, but we'll create a transcript here. But and so we say, if you look at your company as you're Is your scorekeeping system more like figure skating or ice hockey? Well, in figure skating, the performer doesn't know his or her score until it's too late to fix. In hockey, you can change lines, change strategies. You can even pull a goalie and put an extra rusher on the ice if you're behind. So you got to ask yourself, my place, scorekeeping, ice hockey, or figure skating. Third, the goals are more clearly defined in recreation than they are in work. So even if we go to a company picnic and somebody sets up a volleyball court, we always go, well, it's the rock, it's the tree over there, the driveway, and then that bush. Those are the out of bounds lines. Everybody got that clear? Nobody gets, we go to a golf course, we ask for a map of the course. We know the goals, and the goals are available before we start to play. Number 4, they don't change the rules on you in the middle of the game. We insist on a baseball having a certain elasticity. You can't cork a bat, where you have to tell Tom Brady to inflate his footballs. Golf balls have to be standard. You can't have square grooves in a club. So we drive for this consistency of coaching. That's sort of the parenthetical part of Principle 4, is that the coaching is more consistent in recreation than it is at work. And that's because everything's set up. So when somebody birdies a golf hole, or better yet, eagles a golf hole, we know what appropriate feedback is. It's like going crazy, right? We don't go, well, that was your job. That's your job, Sergio. Sorry, pal. No, that's dumb. So, and then the last one is there's a higher degree of personal choice in recreation than there is in work. Now, I'm a downhill skier. I live in Park City, Utah. I'm just 30 minutes away from being in my locker with my skis on snow. I think there's no reason to walk up a mountain that has a perfectly good ski lift on it. That's crazy. But there are other people who are cross-country skiers, or three-pinners they're called. They don't have heel bindings. They can walk up the mountain. And they look at me and go, why would you pay somebody $100 a day to do something you can do on your own? Just choice. And so what we recognized is that people want to choose their method. And if you allow people to choose their method, like my shrink dollars saved per man hour, if you allow people to choose their method, their ownership is immediate and irreversible. If you impose methods, what you drive is pushback.
That's absolutely true. So, and I'm, of this last one in particular, I have to say I'm a complete fan of giving people choice, because just choice gives you, ownership over what you're doing, over your solution, over whatever it is that you're doing, and ownership is a powerful, very, very powerful motivator for sure.
Okay. So thanks for letting me share that.
No, that was beautiful. It was fantastic, Chuck. But now we're kind of running out of time, but I don't want to let you go without, well, we already did a shout out for your books, but also, is there any other place where we can find out more about you? Are you on social media? I don't know.
Yes.
If people want to ask you a question, want to get in touch with you, how do we do that?
Yeah. Books are all available on Amazon, paperback, softback, some in Chinese, some in Japanese, Spanish, Portuguese. Anyway, Amazon for the books. We do have a website. We've just kind of cleaned it up to reflect my retired status, but you can find us there at gameofwork.com. If people, and that'll give you a vehicle to drop me an email. I hope that you know that I enjoy what I do. I enjoy what we have done, and it's fun to have somebody raise a new challenge every now and then, and be able to engage, and it keeps the brain cells stimulated. So happy to be involved in that. On our website, you can get an executive electronic summary of each of our 5 books, and there's no cost for that. And we send it to you, and we're not going to chase you, because I'm having too much fun being a grandpa.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic, Chuck. So Once again, thank you very much. As we've already heard from Chuck, he's kind of retired by now, so his time is especially more valuable now because it's spent with what he wants to do with his family, with his things, and with the clients that he wants to take as well. So we're very, very thankful for all of that, all of those insights, all those stories, all those things that we can learn. And again, engagers, remember that you're here to get all these stories and to see how you can apply them into your own life. That could be in your classroom, that could be in your managerial role, that could be in your leadership role, that could be in many different situations. And there's many things that you can do with all this knowledge that Chuck has been giving away during this interview. If there's anything else, any final quick piece of advice or anything else you want to leave us with, and then we'll say it's game over, Chuck.
Well, I think I would just say this, that recognize that our Creator has put into each and every one of us this desire to succeed, this desire to be better. And when you learn how to tap into that, there's no limit to the kind of performance that your team will drive for you. If you don't recognize that untapped potential, then you'll forever be talking about kids today don't have what it takes to make it happen.
That's one of the key phrases I take from this interview. That was absolutely incredible. Thanks again, Chuck. Now it's time, engagers, to say it's, for now, game over.
Thank you.
Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more interviews with incredible guests like Chuck, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list. That way we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And before you go to your next mission, would you like to know how to use mystery and curiosity for your class and gamification? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!